Afternoon, everyone. Sheila, I believe this is your meeting as you were officially voted the chair some many months ago. It may be appropriate if we want to start. I know we've had some new members and a couple of folks have been in and out, so we may actually just want to kind of go around the virtual room real quickly and do some quick introductions if you'd like to start.
Sure. I am Sheila Garcia. I work with Wells Fargo. I have been a part of this committee for 3.5 years, and this year I was voted the chair, and then several of the meetings have been scheduled and I've been out of town. So now I'm here at the very end.
I'm gonna go
for the intro. So we'll go around the room then. Meredith, I know you're with Winston-Salem. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, Meredith Martin. I'm the Deputy Director of Budget and Performance Management.
Awesome. Shannon?
Hello, my name is Shannon McKean. I'm a professor at Wake Forest.
Awesome. And when did you join?
This is my second time. I think I'm in my third year. I'm one of the ones in and out only because of scheduling conflicts.
Gotcha. Hey, Seta?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Haysetta Shula, and I work at Winston-Salem State University in the Department of Biological Sciences. And I've been here as long as Sheila.
Awesome. Jasmina? I said that wrong.
It's okay.
Jamasina?
I go by Jamie.
Okay. Jamie.
It's nice to meet you, everyone. I'm a new member to the CBEC Council, and I work for the city of Lexington. Well, I work for Lexington City Schools, but I live in Winston-Salem. I'm a longtime resident. And I formerly worked at Winston-Salem State with Miss Schuler, not in her office, but I was a member of the Remley as well, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome, Jamie. Thank you. Tony?
Hi, all. My name is Tony Piacenza. I've been on the committee since, I guess, this spring. So a few meetings in now, and I am still technically a graduate student in sustainability at Wake Forest University. Should be done in the next month or so, and we'll see what's next. But I do live here in Winston-Salem.
Awesome. Nathan?
So I joined late. I guess we're doing introductions. So my name is Nathan Bourne. I'm a property manager with Real Source Management. I've lived in Winston pretty much all my life, but not officially until 2015. So.
And you've been on the committee as long as I have, I believe.
Yeah, since 2017. Yeah, so long time.
Yeah. And Fred?
Hi, I'm Fred Salisbury. I've been on this committee now. This is my first year on this committee. I'm a professor at Wake Forest, and I've lived in Winston since 2002.
Awesome. And Tanya?
I'm Tanya Banner. Good afternoon, everyone. I work for the budget department.
Awesome. Thank you. Back to you, Scott.
So one, I want to say thank you to everyone for the change of schedule that happened a couple of weeks ago. Instead of trying to ram this through here as part of the budget season, decided that it made a little more sense to talk with the city manager, since most of your focus for a work plan was ARPA related, to be part of that city council meeting in August that's going to be almost 100% focused on ARPA. And so your recommendations will come on an agenda at the same time that the city council sees a lot of the programming associated with what we're talking about. Thought it made a little more sense to do it that way. And so I appreciate everyone's time and extending this out a little bit. We got a few things on the agenda here. The first, or there's numbers 2 and 3. I'm going to pull up the presentations that were given, so non-ARPA related, and show you what City Council saw in terms of the proposed budget for both operating and capital, and then also talk briefly about the Finance Committee changes, as 3 of those budget workshops have taken place since the last time we spoke, and Finance Committee recommended a couple of changes to the budget. I am going to pull up the full presentations, but what you're going to see me do is skip through the slides really quickly, because one of the presentations is about 45 slides long and the other is 30. And so if you see something and you want to ask a question, cut me off. Otherwise, I'm kind of hit the high notes as we go along. So give me just 1 second and I will get the operating budget presentation up. Hopefully here, screen share. It says, well, let's see if we can just share the PDF. Does everyone see the PDF that says 23 proposed budget?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So this presentation went over the overall budget as well as resident survey data, which I'll touch on really quickly at the end. So the total proposed budget was at that point $625.8 million. You can see the breakdown in operations, debt service, and capital. Probably what highlights this better is this table. There's about a $94 million change year to year, budget to budget. That is pretty large for the city. We normally don't see something like that. A lot of it is tied to the $55 million LOBS package that is in the budget. We normally don't do bond packages during budget. We do them via amendments, kind of off cycle. But that's part of that $93 million or $94 million change year to year. There was $18.5 million in compensation adjustments, which also included 35 net new positions, and we'll talk about those pretty briefly. The city put a substantial amount of money into vehicle acquisition, which is really vehicle replacement. So we have a lot of aging equipment that we're taking care of in this budget. And that $6 million in debt service just reflects general government debt service for bonds that have already been issued. So the 2014 and 2018 bonds, as we actually issue the debt, those debt service payments are increasing in our operating budgets. At a high level, what the budget looks like, environmental health is the largest component of our budget annually. That includes our utilities department for the entire county with water and sewer and solid waste. And so we always see that as the largest service area. Public safety with police and fire is also a very large area. And then you see it kind of scale down as we go further through the service areas. On the revenue side, charges for service, that's a reflection of the fact that the water and sewer service, that was the highest expenditure area, is also the highest revenue area, and it charges out through water and sewer fees for all of its services. Property taxes, roughly a third of the total budget. Intergovernmental resources is really grants and other things. So think our transit system and all the federal grants that come there. Sales tax at about 10%. And then again, bond proceeds normally wouldn't really show up very heavily on our normal budget cycle, but because of that bond package, it is in there as well. Looking at the property tax base overall, this was the estimated growth that we got from the county at under 2%. So not growing quite as quickly as we had on average in the 3 years before the last revaluation cycle, and not growing quite as quickly as some of our counterparts in the Triangle area and Charlotte area. This budget, as we've talked about, did include a property tax rate increase. I'll stop here for a second. When we talk trial balance budget, we showed $0.015, and then we showed a recycling fee. The management team met and decided to eliminate the recycling fee and propose it in the property tax rate as we had talked about last time. So we talked about that in the last meeting, but it became official here in the last couple of weeks, a less regressive form of revenue generation for those on the lower end of the income scale. So we do have an almost 2.5-cent tax rate increase for this year. Quick note on sales taxes, we looked at that too. This will play into part of how the Finance Committee recommended funding for some of the changes to the budget. We have been seeing some increased or significantly higher sales tax receipts than what we budgeted. I would say from a staff perspective, we're a little worried about where the economy is going. So we, like everyone else, are kind of waiting to see what happens on the retail sales side. From an employee compensation perspective, included an average 3.8% merit for most city employees, created that career and stepladder program. Down here, you'll see 5% promotional career opportunities for police and 3% for fire. Well, we will talk about this, but the Finance Committee recommended matching the fire to the police one so that it would be 5% promotional opportunities and 10% compression and fire as well. So that's a change from what was in the proposed budget to what council is going to see this coming Tuesday. Won't go through this in great detail, but we created that police officer 2 and master police officer level for 3 and 6 years of experience. Police, as part of a step plan, are also getting a 2% adjustment in July and again in January, but they won't be subject to merit the same way other employees are. However, they still do have to have a satisfactory rating in order to get their increases. Again, this is kind of more of that, how the the step and pay plan works. General fund highlights. So the general fund is up almost 12% in the proposed budget. It will be up more than that in the recommended budget from Finance Committee. You can see there on the property tax side, we've got the increase in the property tax rate. Sales taxes at 22%. That will be even higher in the recommended budget to council. Again, personnel increases of roughly 9% related to a couple of things we'll talk about. And the rest of these we'll actually talk about here in these coming slides. So overall, 9.2% increase in personnel in the general fund. It's 9.7% in salary, wages, and benefits. And then we used $1 million in salary savings to kind of help pay for those. The city is seeing an almost 20% attrition rate overall. So we have a lot of vacancies, and the budget reflects that we have a higher than normal vacancy rate. Again, kind of those bullet points at the bottom. The police and fire pay plan adjustments were a little more than $7 million. We got rid of the flat rate pay plan mid-year, ensuring that all seasonal and part-timers are paid $15 an hour, or at least $15 an hour. And in terms of new positions, these are the new positions that were part of the proposed budget. I think we had looked at some of these in the trial balance budget as well. They may be spelled out a little more here. Several positions in community development related to housing and neighborhood services, as well as that continuum of care coordinator to help with coordination of homelessness and homeless services. The vegetation management and recreation positions we talked about are related to new recreation amenities that have come online as part of population and human-related development services. And then two folks in the fire department. So these are not out in the side riding the trucks, but this looks very similar to what it looked like last time we talked on kind of the supplies and contracts and services side. The recycling contract is up considerably. We are going to bring that in-house and to kind of mitigate some of that cost increase in future years. We have $1 million in increases in fuel in the general fund. I will stop here and tell you those fuel, that $1 million number probably needs to be doubled if fuel prices stay where they're at currently. We are budgeting fuel at $3 a gallon. The city does not pay taxes, so that's the equivalent of you and I paying $3.65 at the pump, hoping that comes back down. If it does not, the city will probably have to dig into its reserves for, if they were to stay where they're at least $1 million in the general fund just to pay for next year. We talked about those sanitation tipping fees, during explosion in residential collections, and so we're still seeing that increased cost, as well as the landfill has increased its tonnage tipping rates the last couple of years. Again, building security for metal detection services in our two administrative buildings downtown. We are consolidating fire dispatch assigned reserve policy from 14 to 16%. GFOA says that we should carry 2 months expenditures, which is roughly 16.7%. Other than Greensboro, I think all of the other major cities in North Carolina are carrying policies of 16% or more. So we're kind of aligning with what our bond rating agencies are asking us to do, what GFOA is recommending, and what a lot of our peers are doing. Oh, Lord. And it looks like the PDF itself has closed out. All right, give me 1 second. Let me see if I can open this thing back up. This is what happens when your computer runs out of memory. We're related to what our peers look like with respect to that fund balance number, as well as something else the LGC has asked us to look at, which is combining fund balances in our general and debt service funds. So if I can get down to that part, I will just show it to you and then skip over it extremely quickly. So for whatever reason, the PDF decided to stop working. So here's what our municipalities again look like. So again, Raleigh was at 14, Charlotte and Durham at 16. Told you Greensboro was kind of down at the bottom. We do have, I'm just going to gloss over this entirely, but there's another calculation, like I said, that our local government commission does at the state level that combines some of our different funds and shows where we are with combined fund balance compared to some of our peers. And you can see Raleigh substantially higher. Some of that is an accounting difference for how they account for things. Wouldn't worry about this too much. I think we're in a safe area for now. We do show the city taxes and fees comparison for property taxes, water and sewer bill, and then other selected fees, which includes stormwater, motor vehicle privilege tax, and any solid waste fees that recycling fees that cities have. This was adjusted this year, again, for property values. What you see there, Greensboro used to be right down there at the bottom with us. As part of their proposed budget, they recommended a rate neutral calculation during a revaluation year, which was an effective almost 12-cent increase in their property tax rate. So they have jumped from neck and neck with us to all the way up there with Durham, neck and neck at the top, based on kind of their home values. I will say, for those of you that read the News and Record or the Rhino Times, there are a lot of articles from talking about the mayor and other council members saying that they don't intend to go that full proposed 11.7 cent effective tax rate increase, but that's to be determined. We're just showing the proposed numbers for each of the cities here. We'll breeze even faster through the resident survey data. Meredith worked with other staff to pull this information together. We do the resident survey once a year. We do get a statistically significant sample that allows us to make those generalizations across the entire city about how the overall population is feeling about a myriad of services that we provide. We do actually get a substantially higher response rate or a number of responses than many of our peers. If you watched a couple of the budget workshops, you'd hear a couple of council members saying we still don't ask enough people, but when you look per 1,000 residents, we are well above the Durham, Raleigh, and Charlotte areas. It does give us a smaller margin of error to do that. So our margin of error is usually in the 3% range instead of the 5% range, and doesn't cost us a lot more to do it. In terms of respondent demography, from an ethnicity and race perspective, pretty much matches our demography as a city very well. Male and female usually split right down the middle. Own versus rent. This is one that a lot of cities struggle with, getting a lot of the rental population to respond to these. 33% compared to 67% for owner occupied residences is actually higher than we've done in the past. So that's a good thing for us. Annual income, pretty good distribution here. See there, looking to the right in the top, that 44% of the respondents had an annual household income under $60,000. I believe median household income in the city and Forsyth County is in that $50,000 to $60,000 range. So, roughly 44% of our respondents, not including the 14% who decided not to tell us, are at or below median household income for the area. There's a lot going on in this slide. The takeaways here, top priorities from what residents said, several in crime prevention and police visibility. That WISTA one shows up because of the way we ask the question. There will always be a WISTA priority because it's a separate section. Maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, we'll talk about that one, but it is a category that residents are none too happy with and have not been for quite some time. And down the list, you can see some things in our community development department related to vacant structure demolition, housing rehab programs, and enforcing cleanup of debris on private property with our code enforcement area. Water and sewer affordability is really interesting. We're one of the lowest cost water and sewer programs basically in the country. So that one pops up. That may just be a reflection of overall economic conditions. And then cleanness of catch basins for stormwater and maintenance of city parks. I'm going to kind of go through these again pretty quickly, but what this shows you, people tend to just stare at the bottom of this list. There are roughly a third of the city is in some way satisfied with the maintenance of city streets, which means 2/3 of the city is not. We'll look at the benchmarks for this and where we compare to some of our peer groups as well. But you tend to kind of look down there, where is the city not doing so well? And so the areas where we get dinged the highest, you can see there, public communications, stormwater, permitting and inspection services is always an interesting one. I think there aren't a lot of people who probably use that on a regular basis. WISTA is kind of down at the bottom, and then code enforcement as well. You saw some of those in the top priorities listing. I'll highlight here the one in the middle, overall feelings of safety in the city. So we're significantly lower than both of the comparison groups there. So the overall yellow is the US and the red is the Atlantic region that ETC uses. So our residents overall don't feel as safe as some of our counterparts, and there's a pretty big gap there. What's really interesting is when you get to police services, they actually rate our police department higher than residents in other cities rate police departments. So it's not necessarily that the police services or the police department isn't doing its job. There's just an overall difference in how we feel about safety and perceive safety in Winston-Salem compared to some of those other areas. I'll draw your attention down to the bottom again, maintenance of city streets and sidewalks. We are well below the comparison groups there, and the trend is downward away from those comparison groups. So not only is city street maintenance rated the lowest service that we currently have, we are actually diverging from the benchmarks as well. So that is not a good sign. We'll talk about that in terms of there's money for street resurfacing, additional funding for street resurfacing, both in terms of some state street aid increases that we're getting, as well as in the bond package. And I will also tell you, Finance Committee was this week. We put out an RFP for street resurfacing. Based on an initial estimates, it should have cost about $5.2 million, I think, or it ends up being $2.1 million higher is what the bid came in at. So I think it was 5.2 to 7.3. The cost of asphalt has increased so substantially in the last 3 to 5 months that we saw a $2 million increase in a bid that we've been holding for the last couple of months to get out. So that's an area not only where I think the city council would like to put some more money, and residents are saying we need more money, but it's also getting prohibitively more expensive to do that. Leaf collection services was down at the bottom. I think we've heard that through CityLink. It was no surprise to see that. We don't have the separate one here for brush collection services, but we've heard some pretty significant issues with brush collection services, and I think that's reflected in Leaf as well. So we always tend to take the resident survey data and talk about the things we're not doing well. We do need to reflect on the fact that, I mean, we do rank higher in 34 of the 57 areas than the US average that we're comparing to. So in more than half of the categories, we're doing better than the overall peer group. 85% rated the city as an excellent or good place to live, with only 5% giving a rating of average or poor. So at a high level, it's not that we're not rating, our residents aren't rating as well, but it's that we tend to focus on those areas that need improvement. So when we get down here to the bottom, again, kind of distilling some of the higher need areas for resident survey responses. Maintenance of city streets, obviously we talked about that. There is additional funding for that. In terms of crime prevention and police visibility, we do have additional recruitment and retention policies to get additional folks into the police department. There was $1.35 million added to the budget last year that is still being spent for additional crime prevention plans. We do have actually a significant number of positions and a new crew for that third bullet point in terms of vacant structures and cleanup of trash and debris. So we're actually adding people in community development for abatement activities. The on-street parking downtown has shown up a couple of times in the last 4 years. It showed up again this year. There's $1.6 million in the LOBS package that council is set to approve for downtown parking enhancements. So think moving away from the 1970s coin meters to something a little more 2020-ish, as well as in our parking decks, not just on-street parking. And then in parks maintenance, again, the LOBS package includes, I think it's about $17 million worth of repairs, improvements, and enhancements to our park amenities. So many of the things that got touched on in the resident survey as issues are things that the FY23 budget is actually addressing. So I think that's a very good thing. So that's overall the operating budget and resident survey data that we showed council. I'll stop there before I transition into the capital side really quickly. Does anybody have any questions, general comments, anything there that caught them off guard? hearing silence, I will assume not. I will pull this capital one up and go through this. Again, this is going to be very similar to what we showed from the capital workshop that council had in March that we've already discussed 2 or 3 meetings ago. What does the 6-year capital plan do at a high level? The first year of the 6-year capital plan is actually this year's capital budget. The other 5 years are a planning guide for how we would spend anticipated money in the future for general government and proprietary fund needs. Generally, the capital plan, those higher level assets, construction, land purchase and development, things related to stimulation of economic development and housing. Usually assets that are $100,000 or more unit cost and have an expected life cycle of at least 10 years. When you think buildings and land, it's usually much longer than that. The capital plan for this year focuses really heavily on infrastructure maintenance. So out of that $55 million LOBS package that we'll look at, a majority of that is really for bridges, street resurfacing, recreation amenities and improvements, street lighting that needs to be redone. So a very heavy focus from the city council on maintenance as opposed to new assets. There are a couple of things that we're calling kind of those must fund projects. Major League Baseball has sent down some rules for additional enhancements that have to be made to Truist Ballpark downtown. And so we do have funding for that, as well as we talked about fire consolidating dispatch services. The police department's 911 or city's 911 communication center is actually going to move over to the county building. They're not going to fully consolidate in the beginning. I think that's going to be studied, but we are for various reasons, one including the need to meet new regulations for the hardening of the structure that the 911 center is in. It'll be moving to the county's public safety building downtown. So looking at the package overall for that $55 million, it's about a third each in transportation, livable neighborhoods, and economic vitality and diversity. We'll go through what's in these. Again, that quality transportation area, a lot of bridges, street resurfacing, and other road improvements. Livable neighborhoods is almost exclusively recreation and parks. And then on economic vitality and diversity, we'll talk about it here. The Transformational Job Training Center that would be located in the Northeast Ward is part of that package, as well as some improvements there to the public assembly facilities. Talked about the 911 center upgrades. On the service excellence side, we're really looking at some things for our city yard, where some of our field operations are housed out of, as well as the roof on our one of our municipal services buildings over off of Lowry Street needs to be replaced. We also have a tenant in there that's experiencing some issues because of the roof. We've known about it for a while, but are just getting around to, instead of patching that roof, replacing it. Did talk about on the livable neighborhood side, kind of these recreation projects. So we see at the Carl Russell Rec Center, some additional improvements and a walking trail at Helen Nichols Park, Granville Park improvements. A lot of that is pathways, drainage issues, and lighting and visibility issues. I won't go through each one of these one by one, but you do see here several things that are spread out across the entire community, not concentrated in one area. So there definitely was a look at equity and ensuring that the entire community got both improvements and things that are needed to be replaced, fixed. I'll kind of draw your attention down here to the bottom a little bit, that recreation and parks maintenance project. So there's about $5 million tucked away in a series of smaller projects that would do a lot of resurfacing of parking lots and paved pathways. There's quite a bit of tennis court resurfacing and rebuilding for those areas that need it, including converting one into a pickleball court at Sedge Garden, replacing the Salem Lake Pier with a different type of composite decking that makes the maintenance significantly easier, and you don't have to replace the boards as often, and kind of on down the list. So that's about $5 million worth of, I mean, that's just really maintenance projects spread out across the city. We do have a roughly $1 million contingency there. Again, knowing that a lot of our construction bids are coming in higher, We feel that we've done some conservative estimation in some of these projects, but really kind of put a placeholder just in case something happens. On the transportation side, so the city match for a sidewalk at Brewer Road. Again, we talked about that downtown parking management thing as part of the resident survey data. Several bridges in here. So the First Street Bridge, that's just an additional amount that's needed to complete the construction budget for that bridge. $4.5 million for Glade Street is the full bridge replacement. Lowry Street repairs, that's not the building that we talked about, that's the actual street. Lowry Street was originally designed as a residential street, but actually has several businesses on it now. And because it was not designed that way, it is eroding very badly, and the full road needs to be milled all the way down, the base recompacted and completely rebuilt. Some improvements on Northwest Boulevard. Again, $4.5 million for street resurfacing, but I told you $2 million of that's going to get eaten up for projects that we expected to already do, where the bids came in significantly higher. Again, another bridge replacement. So we actually have 10 bridges altogether on the bridge replacement list that need to be replaced in the next 5 to 10 years. And then, like you saw in recreation, a contingency of $1.5 million because we just don't know what's going to happen out there. None of this requires a tax increase. Debt service fund has been doing pretty well. We haven't issued debt for some of the other things as quickly as we thought we would. And there is a lot of one of the sales tax articles that goes into the debt service fund. And so those increased sales tax receipts have really been helping as well to build a fund balance. So we can issue that $55 million in debt without a property tax rate increase. The rest of these slides are a further distillation of the capital plan. They're things that we already looked at a couple of months ago and won't touch on them in really high area unless somebody has some questions. But the overall capital plan is roughly $420 million. You can see, just like we saw in the operating budget or the total budget, healthy environment, because of our utilities department, is really the majority of our capital plan, with all of the needs in water and sewer and solid waste. And on the revenue side, we show reserves. That's because water and sewer and solid waste use their reserves or their operating revenues to pay for all of their projects at this point. They have enough cash to do that. So do want to touch really quickly on this one area. In addition to that $55 million in LOBs, we talked about general fund balance for a couple of projects. So some of those you see here, where we're using about $4 million in cash in the general fund to fund several things. There was one greenway on the west side of town in the LOBs package, the Newell Massey Greenway, that has been closed for some time. We're going to be using general fund money for, and then just kind of a smattering of other necessary maintenance and other priority projects. So like I said, I won't go too much further into the unfunded list that we've already talked about. But does anybody have any questions about kind of the capital plan or capital budget there at a high level? I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I have a question for you, and
Sure.
and please chalk this up to me being kind of new on the council. So when you discussed unfunded projects, these are needs that the city or folks in the city or departments have identified that currently are not listed in the proposed budget just for right now.
So because you have asked that question, let me go down here and show this list very quickly.
Okay.
And the answer to that question is yes.
Okay.
I would be very careful with the term need. They are requests.
Requests.
Some of them have, I don't know that I necessarily call them validated needs, but they are requests from departments
Right.
elsewhere. So let me get back
Okay.
to the screen share really quickly. So it's about a $1.3 billion in unfunded requests. You see that transportation is $1 billion by itself. In our livable neighborhoods area, you'll see, I think there's about a placeholder of about 80 million for affordable housing. So some of these are very large numbers. What it breaks down into, so sidewalk construction and repair, there are, if we were to put sidewalks on every street that we could feasibly put one on and repair every sidewalk we had all in 1 year, it would cost us $500 million. Again, we've got about $285 million worth of road improvement projects. So those are intersections improvements, road widenings, and that sort. Street resurfacing, this includes asphalt and concrete streets. And then the list kind of goes down from there. We're taking a little bit of a plug out of some of our recreation and parks improvements, but we have some master plans. Think about the quarry is currently in phase 2. I think it was initially a 4 or 5 phase project. So we do have some large projects with master plans, multiple phases still out there. The urban circulator or streetcar, we still have a plug number for that. We'll draw your attention to this stormwater improvements. We're probably going to be coming back to City Council in the fall to talk about some rate increases for stormwater to meet some of those needs. And only $15 million in unfunded bridge replacements because of what we're doing with the LOBS package. That number was significantly higher last year. So that's kind of how that unfunded plays out. $1.3 billion is a very large number, but when you see how much of it is kind of in the transportation area at $1 billion, probably it makes a little more sense to you at a high level.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just wanted to understand what all was in the unfunded kind of area, but what it sounds like is that some of these, there is some of these projects or types of projects that are being funded. It's not like road improvement, street, affordable housing, recs and parks, like you said, economic development. So there are some things and some projects that are in the funding for the upcoming year, but these are just some other requests or identified areas by different departments that have not been allocated some funding. Is that?
These are above and beyond what we're showing as being
what we had. Okay, that's okay. Thank you.
Yep. So I want to share one more thing really, really quickly. That's the proposed budget that went to City Council. I haven't closed this out. I'm going to show you really quickly what City Council added to that. Hopefully everyone can see this Microsoft Word document, and I will zoom into it just a hair. So 3 things that have been added here. When we talked about the operating budget, talked about those public safety pay plans and how the fire departments basically wasn't equal to the police departments in terms of their promotional opportunities in the career plan. City Council or the Finance Committee proposed to make those equal. That cost roughly $1 million to do that. The Behavioral Evaluation and Response Team, or BEAR, is something that's come before Public Safety a couple of times, a Public Safety Committee. That is our alternative 911 response when a law enforcement officer may not be needed for things that are mental or behavioral health related. So hiring some clinicians and such and letting them respond to calls where you probably don't need to send somebody with a gun and a badge. And a summer and after school tutoring program at 2 specific kind of higher crime, lower income areas in the city were added. This is being funded without a tax rate increase. So you see $1.8 million. I'll start with that BEAR program. 700,000 of that you see in parentheses there is the Arpa Framework. So we've talked about that a couple of times, that it was sitting in that admin or other area and was presumed that we would use this. So we're funding the first year of that program from the Arpa Framework. In a future year, if that pilot continues, it'll have to be picked up by the general fund and general purpose resources, i.e. sales tax and property tax. The rest of, a majority of the rest of that was picked up with sales tax. You do see using a little bit of fund balance or one-time funds to cover some of this ongoing cost. I will tell you, sales tax receipts have continued to come in above budget all year long. And so the projection for what we would get next year went up accordingly. This last distribution was a little worrying for us, but we'll have to see how it plays out. We had been experiencing about 13% growth in sales tax. It was closer to 6 or 7% growth. In the local components of it, sales tax, some of it's allocated based on what's actually bought in Forsyth County to us, and some of it statewide is then allocated back. The local component of it was actually less than the 5% projection we had. So we're just going to have to keep a close eye and monitor that. We're only projecting 3% consumption growth there or retail sales growth in FY23. So it's still above that 3% mark. So basically they captured about $800,000 worth of growth that we've already gotten and used it for next year. So those are the total changes from Finance Committee. So you take the original proposed budget, add $1.8 million, and that's what's going before City Council Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. And that is about as fast as I can possibly go through a nearly $700 million budget. I'm sorry it took quite that long, but that's where we've landed. Any issues, concerns with anything of that? Otherwise, we'll jump back into the ARPA and start talking about framework and recommendations and distilling those down into what a report will look like. All right, let me exit out of that. I have something else to screen share. Just a few slides here. We actually had a couple of questions from the last meeting that I wanted to answer. I know some of you weren't here for that, but we'll try to answer some of those pretty quickly. I know this isn't in presentation mode. Every time I put this in presentation mode, it messes up. So I'm just going to leave it here and you can kind of see my slides off to the side. First thing I want to talk about, these are the areas that we're going to talk about for recommendations. Just wanted to throw those back out there. But in answering questions, there were a series of questions last time about CNI or choice neighborhoods. I can blow this up a little bit too, and hopefully you can see it. So there were questions around where exactly was this and what were the phases and where were we? So the Brown School site is phase 1, which is currently in implementation. Phases 2 through 5 up here at Cleveland Avenue Homes. Phase 2 is what the developer is currently applying for HUD approval for. In terms of the timeline for that, and I know this one may also be difficult to see, each one of these series of different colored blocks is the phase or the timeline. So we're currently in phase 1, obviously. Complete construction of phase 5 would be completed in 2026 with leasing options in 2027. So we're talking about another 4 to 5 years down the road before complete, assuming we get the funding squared out for all of this, before construction is expected to be completed. So just kind of wanted to answer that pretty quickly. Also, a couple of questions about the overall requests. I sent out in an email an hour or two ago. We did finally send to City Council the list of ARPA requests. And so you can see on that list what was requested, 89 total applications, almost $51 million. Several of those requests being $100,000 or less. So some pretty small requests with what we would consider to be transformational opportunities, but then also 12 requests of $1 million or more, with one of them, I believe, at $4.5 million. So they do run the gamut. I think the lowest one was about $20,000, from $20,000 all the way up to $4.5 million. So there really a lot of things going on in there. I'm more than happy to bring that list up if somebody wants to look at it and talk about it at a high level really quickly. Particularly if there are areas that you want to make recommendations later, City Council should focus in a specific area, we can bring that list up and look at it. But they really do run the gamut of all kinds of services. There are job training services, there are housing services, there are food insecurity services, violence interruption programs, tutoring programs, health care, specific communities, being the Latino community initiatives. I mean, it's just really all across the board in terms of what was requested in those applications.
Scott, I have a question.
Yeah.
With the transformation grants, were there any opportunities for individuals to sign up for collaboration with grants?
So we required, as part of the application process, or you get additional scoring if you openly collaborated with other organizations. So we were actively inviting groups, instead of submitting all of their own, to collaborate with each other and submit a larger project together that would have a more transformative outcome. And so, Meredith, I don't remember the scoring for that one, but there was the 10 or 15% of the scoring, I think, was related to whether or not you had reached out and collaborated with other organizations in the community.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
The last two things we do updates really quickly on anything that's changed in the framework. We really highlighted the only kind of real change was that $700,000 that's in the proposed budget coming from that admin other category of things that are have not been allocated yet. So again, this 10.5 million is where we expect kind of those transformational grants to come from. We're going to have a discussion in that August meeting on digital divide, and I've tried to distill down some of the things that the group has talked about in the last couple of months about recommendations around that. But you see alternative response at 700,000, which leaves this about $1 million at the bottom that's not allocated to a specific program at all at this point. So that's the high level review of some of the questions from last time, as well as kind of the framework. And I do believe the next thing on the agenda is for us to talk about some of those draft recommendations. So we went through a lot of this at the last meeting. There was a lot of back and forth. We went back and watched the video again, and there were a lot of things that were mentioned. And so I'd like to spend hopefully the next 20, 30 minutes, however much we need, going through those drafty type recommendations and maybe consolidating them down to get them ready for report drafting. I did send that out, like I said, about an hour or two ago. If you want to pull up your own copy, I'm going to screen share it here as well. And again, I can blow this up a little bit and make it easier to see. So what I would ask here is cut me off, tell me, no, that's not what we meant to say, or you missed the ball here. But I'm going to go through this list, starting at a kind of a general level, and then talking about each one of the program categories that we had recommendations in. So I think it was Haysetta last time that said it would probably be good if we had some more generalized recommendations than extremely super specific ones. So I tried in this general area to pull things up a little bit. We talked about for funds that are not used, either that $1 million that we just saw at the bottom of the framework, or for the digital divide, and one of our recovery grants programs that probably won't use all of its funding. If there's additional kind of recycled money in the framework, what would you use it for? In reviewing everything that was said, we came up with these bullet points. One of them was, could we use part of the ARPA framework, or a recommendation to use the ARPA framework money to subsidize one-time increases, so lowering the tax rate or a fee increase as part of this budget or a future budget. Several folks talked about additional community violence intervention programming. A lot of talk, and you'll see down here in the housing section, about using funding or even more funding for the city's strategic housing priorities. And that kind of bullet point below it, not only just housing priorities, but investments in targeted redevelopment areas in those housing priority areas or adjacent to them. Also, a recommendation to work with the county and the school board as much as possible in a collaborative effort to look at how we might be able to share resources, as both the county and the school system have gotten ARPA funding. And then also specific to the transformative grants process, as much as possible, tying the award of those grants to high-level strategic plan strategic plan action items and objectives. So that's kind of at a high level where we were. Feel free to talk about any of that, or I can kind of jump down into housing where we got a little more specific. Go ahead and move down into housing. So there was a good bit of talk about being more proactive and trying to use as much of this money as possible for housing production, being new housing production, rather than we had talked about the potential for a lot of this to get eaten up by CNI, which is a redevelopment, doesn't create net new housing opportunities. So a recommendation there, to the extent possible, to create new housing units with this. A couple of questions from multiple meetings that we came to about kind of identifying and addressing specific performance metrics for success related to the number of total units to be developed with this money, as well as the average subsidy per unit. I think we've talked about, there was a Raleigh or Wake County plan that didn't want to exceed $15,000 per unit. I think we've earmarked in the $20,000 to $25,000 per unit range, depending on our average subsidy, depending on where those units are built. But to zone in on something specific, cite it, and at the end of a program, be able to say, this was our metric for where we wanted to be, and this is where we landed. This one, you can make a recommendation on, but I'm going to tell you the city council actually talked about that this week and is probably going to approve something in the very near future as part of the Housing Justice Act that discusses specifically the length of affordability when we do affordable housing projects with city money. So this can very much be a recommendation from CBAC, but it is one that they are already working on and are very close to finalizing. I would expect it in the next month. So in terms of creating target areas throughout the city, there were kind of two concurrent conversations that were going on. One is part of that kind of be proactive, identify areas that we want to develop affordable housing, and also ensure that those are not concentrated in one area, one ward. So we kind of merge those together in terms of being proactive about identifying areas, but ensuring that they're also all across the city, including downtown, including where it may be more expensive and some of the other more affluent areas of the community. Some good conversations here were had, particularly last month, about infrastructure and connectivity. And so that goes back up towards that last bullet point where we talked about potentially using funds in redevelopment areas or areas adjacent to those. The bullet point below that also kind of hitting on some of that crime prevention through environmental design or the broken glass theory, looking at areas where we can make some capital investments in neglected or blighted areas and try and reduce the amount of crime happening there. So those were all the kind of the housing ones that I took away from our conversations in reviewing videos. Have I missed anything specific in housing? Were there ideas or other recommendations for housing money for ARPA or anything more generally there? Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything, or if any of this needs to be edited as well.
No, I mean, for the good of the group, I think that generally seeing that data about the citizen surveys again makes those last couple seem even more important, right? The idea that there is a safety concern and that there is a roads and sidewalks concern, yet there is a general satisfaction with the level of policing and some other programs, right? Where is that disconnect? And that really seems to be, for me, it, rather than just doubling down on kind of new existing road and sidewalk construction or parking plans. Really thinking about comprehensively how those things are linked could really change how some of the movement throughout the city might occur. I think that whole housing section that we're looking at right now, it comes back to that. So I think having a comprehensive plan that takes those things into consideration would be kind of front and center of my recommendation input.
Thank you, Tony. Not hearing anything else, I'll kind of scroll down and keep going. On the digital divide, again, we had $5 million originally in that part of the framework. Not sure how that's going to shake out. We've talked multiple times about that funding would, if we could use it for broadband infrastructure, that would be great. And a lot of questions about that. So a recommendation in that first bullet point to have the city attorney send something through our local delegation to the General Assembly, looking at the authority to do broadband infrastructure investment for municipalities. Again, we don't currently have that authority, but if we were to get it, could really do some good there in terms of building out the infrastructure and cabling. More generally, so this bullet point, and we can change the wording here if we need to, but make investments in bridging the digital divide in selected targeted redevelopment areas. So there was a lot of conversation about you could specifically take that digital divide money and use it in and around CNI, the Choice Neighborhoods area, or other adjacent areas. I do know that we would be most likely targeting lower income populations generally with that digital divide money, but this would be a recommendation to be even more strategic in terms of targeting it in areas that we're already doing significant investments in. Wanted to make sure I heard that one correctly, and that's something that you wanted. I might have gotten a little too specific there with the conversation, but wanted to make sure I had understood that conversation from last month. Do we want to eliminate that one? Do we want to make it more broad, or do we kind of want to leave it there? Again, I can add some meat to these recommendations when I write up the report for you to review it the next before the next meeting. But just want to be really careful with that one. But I did hear a lot of conversation about, man, it would be great if we could not only do redevelopment in areas, but then also use that digital divide money in those exact same areas to really make a transformational difference.
Yeah, I think, Scott, we did talk about that also in connection with some of the after-school programming, as well as, I think, briefly as a part of our conversation about some of the overlap between the city and the county budgeting as far as schools are concerned. I think that was the one other place that we had a connection to that bullet point.
Okay.
And I think also, Scott and Tony, this is where I bring back up the word collaboration, where even if we could have a centralized area in between the low income and those who may have the income, like where a library is located, where we can partner with them and provide specific service using technology for after school programs, or even for college students, or anyone else in those communities. That's where I was speaking earlier about the collaboration is in any way, not just with the Forsyth County school system, but with our local universities and community colleges, where they too can help out in providing some of the technology for services, especially for after school programs, or even for our summer programs, or the programs that we have throughout the year with our youth and with our elderly.
So I'm going to look to the group here. Do we want to kind of amend this recommendation to say something about, collaborating with community partners, schools, and the county to make investments in digital divide? Do we want to keep that targeted redevelopment areas, or do we kind of want to lose that and this to be more of, let's really as a community focus our resources together, but just make sure that we're doing it with the right populations? I can only see about 3 of you, so I don't know how many heads are shaking while I'm sharing my screen here.
I like the latter end.
Okay. I will put on here to amend that, kind of highlight it, and I've taken some hand notes here. So we will adjust that one.
Hey, Scott, on the first one, seeking legislative authority, I wonder if our council should also reach out to other municipalities to see if there's more than just little Winston-Salem that would be interested in asking.
Sheila, that is an absolutely wonderful idea. I know there are a couple of other cities that have been talking about this in the background, and so I think a collaborative effort of several of the larger cities. I will tell you, we have to be a little careful at the General Assembly with how we do that politically. When we align ourselves with Raleigh and Charlotte, sometimes we get into that big city category, and the folks at Raleigh haven't been so nice, or at the state haven't been so nice to Raleigh and Charlotte recently. So we'll talk with the city attorney about if we can find the right partners to do that with and not get us on the wrong radar.
Yeah, I would say I think that it would be equally important to seek out partners or feedback from kind of slightly smaller or slightly outside of the large municipal centers in the northwest corner of the state, right? Some of the maybe larger, maybe county seats, but smaller municipalities.
Yeah. I will say what I know of the main issue with this is the I'm going to say town of Salisbury. I don't know if it's city or town, but Salisbury, North Carolina built out their own broadband infrastructure and was actually selling service to folks. And it got on the General Assembly's radar as a city competing with the private sector to provide that kind of service. I think what we're looking to do here is really augment the private sector, potentially develop infrastructure and then give it to them so that we could subsidize the cost for lower income areas of the city. So I think as much of the conversation we have about just getting the authority, it's about how you really talk about what you want to do. We don't want to compete against the private sector. We actually want to help them get into markets they can't get into by really subsidizing it. And so hopefully we can have that conversation. It's a short session at the General Assembly this year, not an option. So that's something we'd be looking at in the long session in 23. Okay, I will make a quick change there to that in terms of potentially working with other cities, or at least note that in the narrative below this recommendation.
And maybe you say other strategic cities, given probably not Salisbury either. Put them in the category with Raleigh.
Yeah. Okay. I'll highlight that one for a small change as well. Moving down to timing and administrative capacity. So in terms of timing and period of performance, had a kind of a recommendation to spend some of this money a little more quickly and make sure that we don't run into a period of performance issue. So it's all got to be obligated by December 31st of 2024. If we can find a way to get this money out the door into the local economy faster, not only is that good for us generally in terms of providing services, but also kind of mitigates our risks with having to give some of that money back to Treasury. And if we have to give some of this money back, there's going to be some non too happy city council members. So we do have in there a priority to look at trying to spend as much of this as we can in the first 2 years, which would really be about a year from now. So trying to spend a lot of it in the next 12 months. Provide funding for positions and hire positions quickly. So we do have positions in the general fund budget for community development for some of the housing things. We do also have in the Arpa Framework itself 2 positions in budget. We have not been able to fill those positions. The market is very difficult. We are actually going to have to re-advertise. We have reached out to a couple of folks. They didn't reach back out to us for various reasons. So we've got to get our ducks in a row. And I think it should be a recommendation, as you've cited, to ensure that we have those positions filled and the capacity in place to meet all of the auditing and uniform grant guidance requirements. This last one in there, we've talked about this with City Council. I may need to reframe this in terms of how I wrote it originally, but to the extent possible, essentially using that lost revenue calculation money, or that money that we were allowed to calculate via Treasury and kind of bring into our own coffers for some of the more complex projects to really reduce the auditing burden on staff. And not have to deal with some of the federal requirements for procurement and other reporting on that. So as long as you are still in line with that recommendation, that's kind of one that's coming via staff through you to council that we've talked about with them as well. But that's really kind of being smart about which pot of money you're using, whether you're using the actual federal money or kind of the washed federal money that doesn't have as many strings tied to it. Last 2 down here at the bottom for ARPA, creation of a public facing dashboard. So we started doing this, don't have it fully stood up. This needs a recommendation that you have for staff here in the budget office that are doing ARPA to get this up, to get it rolling, to get it public facing so that people can see how this money is being spent. And then also down there to continue, as Frank talked about last month, whenever we have opportunities using multiple media formats, our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, paid radio advertising, newspaper advertising, even television advertising where we need to get the word out about opportunities, but also to continue doing those monthly CLFRF community updates that we do. For anybody that has questions, or for us to just generally tell the community kind of how we're spending the money and showing that framework. Anything that we missed kind of in the marketing component or public reporting piece, I think they were kind of pretty high level with those. Nope. Okay. Aside from ARPA, a couple of budget related ones that have popped up in the last couple of months was generally, and this one was semi related to ARPA, as we have one in ARPA about it too, but looking at any opportunities we had to not increase tax and fee burden with the ongoing inflation that we have. So again, the city council does have before it a 2.36 cent tax rate increase. So a recommendation to do what we can to keep that lower. I think we saw, the additions for a few of those other programs that Finance Committee put forward, going through sales tax instead of the property tax rate, as a way to at least keep the property tax rate where it's at and not increase it again. Sheila, I see you unmuted there. Nope, you didn't? Okay, sorry. Anything that you want to add to that specific one, or is it pretty good? Just kind of a note that, costs are going up. Let's not burden our residents any more than we have to. The second one, again, is already part, you had recommended this as a group a couple of months ago. It's already part of the proposed budget. So one that, unless council makes a change here next week, will be adopted, but rolling the recycling fee into the property tax rate as a less regressive form of revenue generation, as opposed to the really availability fee that the recycling fee would have been. And then I believe Fred brought up this kind of review when we looked at the requests for new positions from departments. The fire department had a substantial number of requested positions. And so a request to look into resource deployment. And I kind of expanded that a little bit based on looking at the request to talk about both overall resource deployment and specific ladder service coverage across the city. So just generally a recommendation to kind of do an analysis of fire department staffing needs from an operations perspective. Tony.
Yeah, I would, if possible, and I'm assuming that this is a part of that pilot program, but a similar evaluation for the Bear program, as far as that, the needs, if there is a way to roll that maybe into the police department's request as well, but just that that public safety resource deployment assessment in general, and how that, if there's an evaluation of that, how it improves or doesn't with that Bear program.
So an evaluation just specifically of the Bear program, not like overall police deployment or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I would like to see, after a year, because there's only an allocation for the first year, right? But so certainly after a year, but even going forward, how those needs kind of shift and reflect if that changes some of the requests from police and fire, who are currently, I'm assuming, are doing most of that work that the Bear program would offset.
Yeah, I think the idea there, I don't know how much of it's going to offset in the fire department. Some of these may come across as medical calls that they're able to go to. So I think the crux of it was on the law enforcement side, but absolutely, as I see what you're getting at there, I will create something a little more structured than this little 5-word thing I've come up with, have it as part of the draft report that'll go out for you to review. But I think I got what you're talking about, Tony. And also, I can tell you that's already on the radar to do. So it'll come. Anything else we've missed there? Like I said, I think from a reporting perspective, what I was thinking of is you'll have kind of these overarching general ideas, and then a couple of specific sections, one on housing, one on the digital divide, one on timing and administrative capacity, one on marketing outreach and public reporting, just like we saw in the work plan. And then a section that's just related to kind of operating budget recommendations for the fiscal year 23 and beyond. So I didn't want to get too far into drafting something that seemed like a lot more recommendations than I thought we were originally going to come up with when I started typing them out. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I want to make sure we were all headed in the same direction before staff invested a lot of time in drafting a draft report. So unless anybody has any changes or additions to these, we will take this draft report and get it out for review.
Thank you for that.
Sure. So what I have on the agenda there is for this group to meet again in July to finalize that report. and approve it. And then Sheila, if you are free as the chair of CBAC, we will get you the date for that council meeting in August and would have you come and present these kind of recommendations, just like chairs have done to Finance Committee in the past.
Absolutely.
And then if you are not available, it would fall to Nate, who was the vice chair. So, and again, we would get this report drafted up for you. Staff would do kind of an executive summary and talking points for you as well. So, awesome. Questions, comments, concerns? The one thing I didn't have on the agenda here was approval of minutes from the last meeting, which I know I only sent out an hour or so before. If you haven't had a chance to read those, we can come back. We'll send the minutes from this meeting out as well a little further in advance and can approve them at the next meeting. Or if you wanted to take them up now, you could, Sheila. That's kind of your choice.
Did you guys have a chance to review them? No. Oh, we've got one reviewer.
Well, it would help if I stopped sharing my screen. There we go. Sorry.
How about if we take on both minutes next month, or I can try to do it by email if you prefer.
I think we'll just take it on next month. We can't take a vote by email anyway. It's not allowed. It's against public records laws. So if you have changes or edits you want to make, absolutely just email them back to staff, and we can make those changes or edits to bring them back next month. But we can't take an official vote via email.
Hey Scott, I was going to take a minor change. I see at least 2 people's names misspelled, including mine.
Okay. I don't have that copy of the minutes up, but we will check on the spelling of the names. Yes, sir. All right. Okay? Well, that's all I had on the agenda, Sheila. Is there anything else that?
Any other items that anybody wants to bring up? Okay.
Thank you, Scott.
Do we need to? Oh, thanks,
Scott. Thank you. Yep.
Great work. Do we need to do a motion to close the meeting, or?
You don't need to. You can just call it adjourned. And we'll
okay, then I say we are adjourned. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you next month.
All right. Thank you.